Okay guys, so I show you for some of you that needs a bit more help with Three.js. I will show you a simple application. So what we are trying to do is load an object, put some texture on the terrain and move the object around the scene. Okay, so again this is the uh, Three.js, this is a basic file, HTML. So as you can see, like here, this is the basic HTML things. Here you include the basic library of Three.js. Everything interesting happens between this script and the end of the script, right? So beginning, so you have to create a scene. I already explained you, but let me briefly explain. The scene is everything that contains geometry, cameras, and light. Renderer, it's something that takes camera and the scene and then visualize from the point of view of the scene. And then it's actually, you set the size of the rendering, which takes the size of the window, and then you add the rendering to the scene. This is a standard thing, right? You can take this my basic code and start with that, and after you actually have to specify a camera which takes for example an angle, the aspect ratio of the camera, which is actually the sides, the ratio between the width and the height. This angle is stays as the focal length, but is expressed as an angle. So as bigger it is, you have more fisheye. The smaller it is, you have more orthogonal things. And this is near and far distance. Everything this is closer than this, you don't see. Everything is as far as this one, you don't see. And afterwards you have to write this function, which is an animation loop. Actually what you have to do here is just render the scene from the point of view, and what you are saying is, like, you call this function, is called request animation frame, which actually stands for, if you have some spare time, please render the scene. Okay, so this is the basic things of Three.js application. So I hope you're already pretty confident with that. So if you open with Chrome, nothing happens because I have just put a camera, but I put nothing on it. And if you want to see some error, you go here and developer tools, right? Always. So if you put some error here, then when you actually update this window, then there is an error. Okay, so before to actually getting crazy trying to understand what is the error, go here and try to debug here. Okay, so let's try to add some element to the scene. So what I want to create is like a sort of terrain with texture and move an object on top of it, right? With some very basic lighting environment. We already seen the lighting in the latest session, so how to put lights. So let's see what happens if I create something really basic. So again, I copy code from another application, so this allows me to go faster. Okay. Okay, so first of all, let's create the terrain. Okay, so for the terrain, in this case, I created something which is like a plane geometry. Okay, actually no, here I create a box geometry, but you can create also a plane geometry. It doesn't matter. Maybe box is better because then you can use also for the walls. And these two numbers is the sides on X, the sides on Y, and the sides on Z, and this is the number of subdivision. Okay, and this is actually is created centered on 0, and to create a mesh you need the geometry, which is like a set of vertices and face interconnecting, and a material. Okay, a material it tells you how this object interact with lights environment, what is the color, if it has a texture, and everything. Okay, so let's define also the material. Okay, let me copy a bit and then we'll change it. Okay, so I actually create a Phong material which is a material that has shininess and interact with lights, and I make it gray. Okay, I added to the scene. That's all. Let's see what happened. Nothing, because actually what I have to put at least a light source, otherwise it doesn't work. So I'm recording this session so you can actually see very slowly, and afterwards you can ask me also questions. Okay, so the basic light environment that you can do is put a light on front of the camera looking toward the scene. So then what you can do is like put what is called point light. Let me copy this. Okay. When you actually add this kind of light on top of the camera, it's important that you also add the camera to the scene, because otherwise you have the light on top of the camera, but then if you don't add the camera to the scene, when it's going to traverse the whole scene, it doesn't see that there is a light, okay? Otherwise the camera and the scene remains two things different. Okay, so what happened now is I go here and I reload it, and I don't see nothing. Let me see why. Okay. Okay, what's wrong? There is no error. It seems everything fine. Blah blah blah. Point light. It seems okay. Maybe what I have to do is I have to put an orbit control also to rotate the scene, so I can see, because maybe it's entirely flat. Let me try to put also the orbit control that allows me to rotate the scene. Okay, orbit control here, and I include the script for the orbit control, and then I actually create this new control, which is called orbit control, that allows me to navigate the scene with the mouse. Okay. Still nothing. Let's see what happened. Okay. So let's. So the box is 10, 10, 0, 3, and the camera is in position. Where is the camera? Yeah, the camera is actually positioned on 0, right? So I'm actually inside the object. Maybe I want to move the camera a bit. So yeah, camera position.set and camera look at. Okay, so these are two parameters. The first one, it tells you what is the position of the camera, and the second one, it tells you the vector where the camera is looking at. By default is this one, but I wrote again to let you understand if you want, in case you want to change. And now it works. Okay, so it's pretty metalish. Okay, so now what I want to do is like adding what is called the normal map. I didn't explain you at lecture. I will explain, but in the meanwhile you can start using that. So normal map is actually a kind of textures that for each color, like this, okay, you have RGB. In RGB you have the normals, right? So it's actually what you are doing. You are doing the you are forcing to do the funk shading in the way you say. So instead of so for each triangle, you instead of having the texture, you have the normal, right? So that means that the normal are not interpolated by considering the one on the vertices, but you specify what are the normals and how they interact with lights. So let me show you the effect of this. It's very cool because with a low amount of geometry you can have very nice effects. So for example, let me copy this. Okay, I load it and I assign to the floor. Okay, for now let me comment this and you will see what happened here. Okay, so I actually added a normal map, and what happened, I have this error, right? First, because I have a compilation error, 55, because the material floor is defined before, so let me define the material floor here, okay? But then there is another error, because essentially when you are trying to load models or texture on your computer, what happens is like the firewall prevents you to load. So there is several solutions. The one for Mac is just going into so let's you open a terminal, right? You go in the directory of your project. In this case is interacting 3.js, okay, and then obviously here you need the file called index.html, okay, and then you actually launch a PHP server, okay, on this address, which is your machine address. So then when you actually run again the browser, so what you get is your application, and you have this nice effect, right? You see, this is not texture, these interact with lights, and the nice thing is like you don't have any geometric information, it's just a texture. The texture tells you the light for each point of the surface within each triangles, and it's interpolated per pixel into the fragment in the last stage of the pipeline, right? And then that's nice because you get these effects with a lot of with just 2 triangles, right? So this is more than 2 because it's just it's a box. Okay, so if I want to like tessellate my scene with that, so what I can do is like I can say, okay, if I set this to instruction, what I'm saying is like usually when you have texturing, you have UV mapping. In 3.js it's called S and T. I don't know why. Usually it's called UV, but it's the same kind of concept. So these instructions say whatever you finish it with if you want to repeat the texture, whatever you finish it, commence again from the beginning, right? And repeat the wrapping of the texture over the object. And then here you set how many times you want to repeat both on S and both on T, right? If you do so, what happens is that, okay? Which is nice, okay? Okay, now I want to load an object. I want to load my object. So in the other tutorial I show you how to download an object and resize and decimate if you need to import in your application. There's a lot of details, but here I have this bunny, right? I can see with MeshLab is a classical Stanford bunny mesh, like this, right? The amount of triangles is decent, we can load it, then fine. Okay, let's try to load, okay? So the first thing you have to include in your project is like the script that allows you to load elements. For example, if you load apply, you have to load display loader. There is also obj loader you can find on the 3.js website. And the other thing you have to do is whatever you load, you have to instantiate the loader and call this function that I will explain you all the different parts of this function, okay? So let's say now we actually load it. Okay, good. Now let me comment out this, and I will explain you what will happen. Okay, again, so this is a function that given a path, it returns me a geometry, which is a bunch of vertices and triangles that interconnect the vertices. Given the geometry, you have to construct a mesh also with the material. Okay, so let's create the material here, Phong material, and I want, let me cancel this one, and actually you want this color, this shininess, and that's it. Okay, and then you create the mesh with the material and the geometry, and don't forget to add the mesh to the scene. Another thing that you can do when you have multiple objects composing the scene, you can add a name, which is a string, so that can helps you to recognize when you have multiple objects which object is, right? And you can actually apply some algorithm only on certain object. Okay, now let's see what happened. Okay, it seems nothing, but you see here is here, right? It's very small, so yeah, I maybe want to rescale it, right, to fit the scene. So what I can do is like first of all, you have to use the bounding box, right? So let me get this instruction, and then I compute the bounding box. The bounding box is an axis oriented box with a minimum and a maximum of containing the whole object, right? It gives you like more or less the sides of the object. So given the bounding box, you can get the sides. Okay, this sides is a vector tree that it's a vector that connects the minimum to the maximum of the bounding box. So you may want to scale by something which is the inverse of this vector, because then, I mean, if this is very big, then it's scale it down. If it's very small, then it's scale it up, right? So you find the scale factor, and then what you do, it's like you create, for example, a matrix, and then you actually scale. You create a scaling matrix about this value. Okay, so this encode your transformation. This is also other way to do it, but in this way you understand how this matrix works. And then you actually make this matrix uniform scaling about the scale factor, and then actually you apply this scale factor to the matrix, okay, to the mesh, sorry, this transformation matrix to the mesh, and let's see what happens. Okay, so I go here again, tack. Okay, now it's pretty much in the center. Okay, so what happens is, the problem is that I'm actually I'm not computing the normal for this one. Okay, so this is because you see like that. So let me update the normal. Okay, okay, now it's nicer. So of course this object is up, so I want to translate to 0 and want to put in the center of the scene. So maybe I need also to create a translation matrix, and how much I translate, let's say like I want to put the center of the bounding box with respect to the 0, right? So I take this one, okay, and then I do like make translation, and then I translate to put the center of the bounding box to the 0, right? Which is like this. Okay, so if I translate minus center, that means the center of the bounding box will go to 0. Okay? And then I have to apply this translation actually before the scale, otherwise the scale will move the object. So I want to scale in the 0, otherwise the scale will actually move the entire object if it's not centered on the 0. Okay? And what happened is this. Okay? So now the bunny is in the center, so I maybe want to move a bit up, right? And to move it up, what I have to do is actually I have to get the minimum of the bounding box, and then instead of moving to the 0, I move like towards minus the minimum, so that along the z it moves how much it needs to move this to 0. Of course, you may want to consider also the thickness of your box, but for now let's not consider, and you can play with it. Okay? So let me make it more thin, so then it's nicer. Okay. Now, if I do so my bunny is, you see, it's on the floor, right? Okay, good. Now, what I want to do, and it's interesting for the people who do like the virtual house, is I want to click this bunny and click to another position and move to another position in the scene. How you can do so? So actually there is another thing that is missing, if you remember, and the fact that if you rescale the mesh, the window, it doesn't adapt. So yeah, so what you can do is like you can I forget to mention that you can go here and link to the resides event this set of instructions that actually reset the camera to the new content. Okay, this is pretty basic, and you can copy. You're actually getting the new width and weight, and set the new sides, aspect ratio, and updating the projection matrix, which is the matrix that makes the orthogonal or projective like projection. Okay, now let's see if it works. Okay, it works. So now let's try to select the object. Okay, so to select the object, what you need is an object called the raycaster. Okay, so I instantiate the raycaster here, whatever in your program. Okay, and then what the raycaster do, it's actually it launch a ray from the viewpoint of the camera towards the scene, and it give you what is the element you touch, even what is the triangle you can get, and you can get what is the point that you touch in 3D, not in screen, in 3D. So it transforms point from 3D from the screen to 3D, and the most important thing, it doesn't give you only one element, it gives you an array which is sorted from the point of view. So the 0 is the one you see, and the second is the 1 is the second element. Okay, so if you want to shoot set of elements right along the ray, so then like iterating to this vector, you have all the elements you need. Okay, now what you have, it's you have to encode a function and then link the mouse down event to this function, and I will explain you what happens. Okay, so let's for now comment this out and comment this out, and I'll explain you step by step what happened. Okay, comment this out. Okay, so what you do is like whatever you have mouse down, you can, for example, here at other events like mouse click on mouse while the mouse is pressed, or you can actually capture different events. So what is done is doing is called this function, and you actually take the two position of the mouse. So these transform the position of the mouse from 3D to the rendering screen of OpenGL. It's pretty standard, you can copy. And then the raycaster, it traces the rays from the position of the mouse towards the camera, okay? And what it returns to you, it's a vector of all the elements intersected along this ray. What happens is, like, if, for example, the intersected length bigger than 0, then you want to color the element of white or a different color, red. Let's see what happens, okay? This is simple. Okay? You see? I selected, okay? So what if I want only to color the bunny, or I want to select only the bunny? What I do is, like, I gave a name to that mesh, so it's simple. I can say that if actually the object intersected has this name, then color, okay? Maybe it may be worth to consider also this function. It's called console, that allows you to print values for the bug during your application, okay? Okay. So if you have this, then you can, if you click here, nothing happens. If you click here, you select it, okay? Good. Now, next step, let's try to move this object, like click the object, I select, click the object, I move, click the object, I select, click the object, I move. Okay. So what I need is, like, first of all, I need to define a Boolean function that tells me that the first time I actually selected the object, okay? So let me define this variable here, okay? By default equals to false, and then let me write another part of the okay, if actually I selected the object, this variable goes true. And then what happens if the next time is, like, is the opposite, right? If, so here I have to say that and not selected, because if it's not selected anything, I can only click on the bunny, right? On the mesh I loaded. Okay. And then on other hands, I have another parts that tell me, like, that if I selected something, okay, so if the mesh name this time is different from loaded mesh, for example, is the floor, here you have just two, but you can put whatever name you want, and is selected, so then I put again the material of the mesh to the default color, so it becomes gray again. Then I get the intersection point. So if you do, like, intersect dot object, you get the object of intersection. Intersect dot point, you get the point of intersection. Intersect dot face, it gives you the face of intersection. So if you want to select a face within the mesh, okay? And then I change the position, so I get this position, and then I change the position of the mesh straight. You can also create a transformation matrix and then translate by that. This is easier. Okay, so if I do so, then I have something like this. I select and I move. I select and I move. I do something here, nothing happens, right? I select and I move. If I select and click here, nothing happens, okay? So this is very useful for the one who has to do, like, the some of the projects that require to place object around the mesh. And this tutorial, it's all. And if you have some question, I'm here, and I can help you also for the projects.